name is Charles Lafond, and I worship at the cathedral in Denver, Colorado. I'm a potter by trade, but I'm also a priest and a writer. And I'm glad to be here among you. The cathedral's a very large and sparkly place. It's nice to be this small. It's really lovely. It's really gorgeous. It's almost Halloween. And I'm spending a lot of my time trying to decide what my costume will be. I've narrowed it down to 40, but I've still got a lot of work to do. And I remember when I was a child coming home, my parents played this game with me as we do with our children to encourage them. I would come in my costume and my parents would look scared and shocked and say, "Who is that strange being in our house in that big, huge costume? What is that?" And I would whip it off and say, "It's just me!" And they would clap and hug me and say, "Oh, we were so scared." It's so lovely when we take our costumes off and just be our soft and fleshy selves. The gospel today of the Pharisee who is sort of posturing to some extent. I mean, he's sort of saying, "Oh, look, I'm not like one of these," you know, which is pathologically rude. I'm not like this one right here hearing me say this. It's so wrong. And I fast and I give tithe 10% of my income, and because we're in stewardship season right now, so that's a big theme, and all these things. And you know, the truth is, he's just doing what he's supposed to do, you know. So he's kind of bragging, but he's kind of, I mean, he's not fasting. He's not listing anything rather extraordinary. He's just he's just a spiritual person, is so he's saying. And then the poor tax collector, who is nobody's best friend, because he's a tax collector and is wealthy, so he's got his own costume on. Pharisee's got his priestly costume on, and then of course the tax collector's got his tax collector costume on, from, you know, like Joseph Banks. And so they're both costume. They're both, you know, costume. And the gospel kind of sets us up to sort of decide which one we're going to, it's like the debate, which one we're going to vote, which one we're going to root for, and which one we're going to boo. And I actually don't think that's helpful in the gospel today, because I think that the gospel's not about one or the other of them being the one we root for, although that's tempting. Because that just makes everything black and white, and we like that. What's odd to me is that, or wonderful to me, is that the real character in the gospel today that takes center stage, if you're looking at it carefully, is God. Because they're both speaking that way to God. And this question of how we relate to God and how God comes to us and how we show up to God is a really important part of the spiritual life. And by spiritual life, I mean life. Because I don't see a distinction. And I think that we sometimes see God, you know, in that, you know, as that high school principal with the pinstripe gray suit and kind of emaciated and a little hemorrhoidal, and has your file on his lap, and he's not sure your name, but he doesn't like what's in the file, and he doesn't even need to open it to know that. If that's your view of God, which I totally understand, that's not true. That's just okay if you're in the 5th grade. The harder view of God is the idea that God could both be celestial, eternal, magnificent, glory, and we talk about the glory of God. The word glory comes from kavod, the heaviness of God, the weight of God's glory, the glory that God wears, those heavy, heavy vestments of glory that God. But then, of course, what happens? Then there's this baby who's pink and soft, or actually probably wasn't pink. We painted him that way, but probably not. Probably brown or tan. In swaddling clothes, in a manger. I mean, what do you do with that soft, smushy God that's about this big? That, burps. What do you do with that God? And I think that this gospel is actually an invitation for us to reconnect to the kind of intimacy that God is offering that we sometimes don't see. At least I don't. I'll speak in I language. I don't. I am so much a part of our society, and we are over-committed, we are over-scheduled, we are overstimulated, we are over-caffeinated, we're even overfed. And that's a hard place to be. I mean, we think we've got it made because, we're a developed country. I mean, who needs a savior if you've got Post-it notes? I mean, Post-it notes are amazing. If you're a society that's developed Post-it notes, do you actually need a savior? Or an iPhone? I mean, after iPhones, do you need a savior when you can just get an app? So the question is begged, do we need God to come and save us? And what would we see when that happened? A baby? Or some terrifying costume? When I was younger, in my first parish as a curate in Charlottesville, Virginia, I lived on Monticello's estate. And I lived back in the woods behind Thomas Jefferson's house. And I loved it there. When the tourists came, they didn't know I was in the woods. And when they left, my dog Puck and I would wander the estate and eat all the vegetables and fruit. That was naughty, but it was fun. And so Puck was just my friend, and he went to the office with me every day, kind of like my dog Kai does today. But Puck was this big. He was a Yorkshire Terrier with those little tiny tail and a fur that looks kind of like a Brillo pad. And so I would drive home, from church every day, and sometimes he'd go to the office and sometimes he wouldn't. And I'd pull in and he knew the sound of the car. And I had one of these little lancet windows by the front door. And he was lovely being, but not the brightest light on the Christmas tree. And so he would sit in front of the door, waiting for me to come through the door. I mean, so excited. So excited. And I would stand by the lancet window because it was fun. I would watch him. And he would sit there on that little carpet with his little tail, and his tail would go back and forth, almost fast enough that you think there might be a little fire. And then the tail would inspire the butt to go back and forth so he'd get kind of rug burn. And then he would get so excited that his body would start, his shoulders would start, and he'd fall over. And then he'd get up and he'd be like, just happened, you did that to me. Charles is coming. And he'd plant, he'd look at the door and go, I'm so excited, Charles is coming. And his tail would go and his little butt would start going. And of course, if I were a good person, which I'm clearly not, I would have left the window and gone to the front door and opened it, and he would jump into my arms and we'd have a reunion. But that's not nearly as fun as standing by the window a second and third time to watch him fall over. I would propose that God sees us the way Puck saw me. I would propose that God is out of God's mind with desire to be with us. If we would just put down the iPhone long enough to turn and look. Just put down the games. Just put down the coffee. Just put down the work. All the things that anesthetize us to our pain. And look at the one who comes. Because I think that we will find that all of the things we use to try to anesthetize the pain we feel, and there is a lot of pain in this life, and even more, a lot of fear in this life. And so to stop using work or shopping or anonymous sex or boundaryless relationships or food or any of the things we humans get up to avoid our pain and to push it back into the closet. If we could just put those things down and wait for the one who comes, God, who is so excited about us and so loves us, will be there, will have shown up, will engage us. There is a story, a true story, actually, about some Marines that went to the Middle East on an aircraft carrier to rescue some hostages. And the hostages were in a bunker, underground, imprisoned, in a room, small room, about the size of about 6 of those chairs. No light bulb in the room, sewage on the floor. Because they had been in that room for 6 months. Imprisoned. In fear. Every time that door opened up, with a light bulb out in the hall, there'd be this light and these people would come through that door, and it would be hell. And they had lived that way for 6 months. But these Marines had gone to rescue them in a mission, and 2 of the Marines leave the aircraft carrier, get into the land, and they are ready for anything because they don't know what they're facing. They have everything on their bodies that they need. They have the helmets, they have the night goggles, they have the oxygen tank, they have the gas masks, they have the ammunitions, they have the guns, they have the belts of grenades, of light flares. They have body armor. They have massive boots, massive gloves. They're like, "Argh!" And they get through, and the two Marines burst through the door. They burst through the door, and they say to the hostages, "We're here. We have come for you." You must go with us. You must go with us, and we will go together, and we will go back onto that aircraft carrier, and we will survive. We have come to save you. Right? We've come to save you, but nobody moves. Nobody moves. Not a muscle. They're just down on the floor, crouched, knees under their chin, arms around their legs, in their sewage, about an inch. And then one of the Marines does exactly what God does. One of these Marines had the same idea God had. Same idea. He takes off his hat. He takes off his goggles. He takes off his gas mask. He takes off everything. He puts it down in the goop. In the goop. He takes off his jacket. He takes off the belts of grenades. He takes off the belts of flares. He takes off all of the guns. He takes off the body armor. He takes off the jackets. He takes off the boots. And it all drops into the sludge. Until he is in black leotards. And then he moves forward, stepping into the muck, and goes to these people who are huddled tight in a corner, tight, tight, tight. And he turns around and he uses that little tiny marine butt of his to push between two of their shoulders. He backs in with his butt and squidges in among those two people, down and in. And he is down in that muck with them, and he is right there, and he puts his arm around the two that he's next to. And he leans to the one next to him, and he says to her in the tiniest whisper, "Really, I promise you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be saved. I have come for you, and you must come with me. I cannot carry you out of here. We are 2. You are 6. You have to get up. You have to come with me." And she moved one muscle. It was her right shoulder, but it was just a twitch. And then she moved a second muscle, and then she moved a third muscle. And she got up. And then the rest of them got up. Slowly, aching, hopefully. And that story ends on an aircraft carrier and 6 family reunions. It is very important to know that we need a Savior, and that one has come. And that if we could put down all the things we keep taking up in order to handle our fears and our griefs, and if we would just turn our head a quarter of a turn, we will be nose to nose with the living God. And when we are, we need only